reading a book right now. Here, let me get it out.
Is it an actual book or is it an electronic book? Because last time you said...
It's on a Kindle.
Oh, so it's not a real book. God, that is so small.
Story of my life.
It's a Kindle, apparently. It's quite smaller than I expected.
Yeah. It's called A Murder of Quality, a George Smiley novel by John le Carre. Fine
Quality
literature.
murder is hard to come by these days.
It is. Especially in Cairn.
In Corn?
Cairn. It's just a bit outside of London.
Oh.
Small religious community.
Modern day?
No.
Oh,
It's just
okay.
like 50s.
All right.
I mean, it might still be there. I don't know. Cairn is a stone, right? Some kind of rock.
Cairn?
Cairn. Thank you.
Maybe I'm mispronouncing it my whole life.
No,
Maybe it's Cairn.
Someone's going to write in and let us know if we're saying
I
it
read
wrong.
somewhere the other day, never make fun of somebody for mispronouncing a word because that means they learned it reading.
Yeah, I've heard that. I still make fun of them, though.
Yeah.
It's just fun.
I said facade for like a decade.
I opened myself up to the possibility that
Okay.
I've been mispronouncing that word.
No, it is Cairn.
Okay.
But I think in this case, the town is spelled C-A-R-N-E.
Cairn.
Yeah, so that's. I think Cairn is spelled a little different. Today on spelling,
Dreamland, the spelling podcast.
D-R-E-A-M-L-A-N-D. Dreamland. I once went skating.
That is correct.
At Dreamland. Michael, aren't you glad you joined us for this riveting show?
You know what? Can I tell you a story? One time when I was a kid, I was in a spelling bee, and I remember for a fact that I spelled the word correctly. And I know that because I still remember the word, and I remember how I spelled it, and they said I spelled it wrong. So either I said it wrong, and I remember, like, because I know how to spell it, and or they just rigged it, which is the way I like to remember the story.
It's terribly cruel because they have the book right in front of them.
I mean, it wasn't even a particularly hard word, especially considering that we were on a military base and the word was colonel, as in the Army rank of colonel, and I spelled it correctly. And
So did you go with the colonel spelling?
C-O-L-O-N-E-L.
Yeah, and they may have been going for popcorn kernel.
No, I asked for a definition.
Really?
Yep. Bastards.
At least it wasn't lieutenant.
Yeah.
That one can be tricksy,
It's true.
I've heard. So welcome back to Dreamland.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dreamland. We're on episode 7.
Already?
Already. Can you believe it's already been 7 episodes?
No,
No.
I certainly cannot.
Me neither. So I'm Melinda,
I'm Aaron.
and we are your hosts for this evening, and we are also joined tonight by Michael French.
Hi.
You
Hey,
guys
Michael.
probably know him from other things. What
Oh.
what does our audience possibly know you from, Michael? Have you done anything else that they might know you from?
Well, I was the social media admin for Voltron for a while,
Sure.
Whoa.
and I'm also the host of RetroBlasting, the YouTube channel.
Oh,
All
the
right.
business that you run with me?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
that's where I know you
It's
from.
nice to meet you.
Oh, good. I'm really bad with names.
I've recently joined the team.
Recently, as in like 2 years ago, but still recently.
It
just
feels like yesterday.
Seems like yesterday.
Well, that's good. That's always nice.
And considering the fact that I'm very, very rarely in front of the camera to everyone else, I've very recently joined the team as a voice,
That's true.
a disembodied voice.
Although you were very briefly in one of our live stream videos. Hey, can we talk about live streaming? It's everyone's favorite thing around here. We've done some live streams, tried to do it. You know, technology is really hard for Generation X, I feel. I feel like it's a very challenging thing, and a lot of times people go, "Oh, you just hook this thing up to this thing and then you press go and it's just that easy." Do you find that to be the case, Aaron?
No, not when it comes to live streaming. It has definitely been an interesting journey, and the more that we dig into this, the deeper the cave goes. So I am very hopeful that we will hit on a formula that works exactly right, but I am attending wizard school.
Are
and
you?
yes, and
Nice.
this giant man in like some sort of fur coat came up and said, "Harry, you're a wizard." And I
Which
said,
house do you think you're going to get put in? That's what I want to know.
I'm gonna guess Slytherin, even though I love the idea of being in Gryffindor. The Sorting Hat knows all.
Yeah, I'm Ravenclaw all the way.
Yeah,
I think Michael's definitely a Gryffindor.
Without a
I think
doubt.
so.
I definitely think so.
Oh, all right. Well, that's good.
As you sit there in your Superman shirt, it seems like the house that Superman would also be in.
That's true.
That's why I put you there.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He never tells a lie.
No. If he tries, he's really bad at it. So he just knows his strengths and he just plays to those. He's nodding, so he knows that's
I'm not
true.
good at science, and I'm not good at, math.
See,
So
I'm good at those things, so that's why I'm Ravenclaw.
So I couldn't be good at any of those Hufflepuff Ravenclaw things. So I just have to be good at my moral conviction, which I guess is Gryffindor.
That is a very Gryffindor thing.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little hazy on that part. So
That's why I just went ahead and said Slytherin. Because I just know.
Lowered expectations.
that's right.
I'm not good at potions or anything. But anyway, the whole point of that whole segue was to say that it's very black magic when it comes to how live streaming works. And it is surprising that, the weather and so many different things can seem to have a factor. There's just moving parts that you can't see because they're behind the table, and you just have to figure them out one by one, work it out. And I'm confident that we will eventually get to the point where we can have what we consider a high quality live stream.
Well, that's the key is you want things to be quality. You don't want to put out things that are frustrating for your audience to try to watch or listen to.
But we're looking forward to answering your questions, interacting. We're just very excited about that. So stay tuned.
We are. We love the idea of getting questions in real time and answering them as though we're having a conversation.
And for those of you who were on the last one, we're so glad you were there, and we're kind of delighted by the idea of sounding like we were Cylons, like toasters.
Yeah, the last time we tried to do a live stream, we had this weird Cylon effect or like the Borg is what we were saying on that day.
I kept screaming, exterminate.
So tonight, speaking of aliens,
Oh yeah,
we have decided to talk about something that's near and dear to Michael's heart and something that's definitely in my nostalgia banks, and that's Superman. And not just Superman, the movies, but specifically the Donner cut of Superman and all of the cool backstory that goes along with that, because it's really, we were talking about this just before you got here, Aaron, and honestly, I would almost say that the backstory is more interesting than the movie at this point.
I sat down and watched the behind-the-scenes production for some of it, and I feel like it scratched the surface. They were being very careful and very corporate to make sure that the DVD left a positive impression, but it was obvious from everyone who spoke of it that, the things that went down in between Superman 1 and 2 left a bad taste in almost everybody's mouth.
Yeah.
I think the only thing everybody agreed on was just how awesome Christopher Reeve was at being Superman.
Yeah. Michael sort of, I'll let him talk about it, but I know you know a lot, Michael, about this whole thing. It's something you've been reading a lot about and watching a lot about for many years. How did you get interested? How did you start learning about the whole backstory behind what happened behind the scenes in Superman?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the 80s, and like so many of our listeners, and what a lot of people don't realize is that the ABC Sunday Night Movie, which came on with the Star Tunnel, and that cool guy with the cool voice who always did the bumpers right before, and he's like, tonight on ABC, Superman returns, dun, 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 it was always this cool bumper.
I always love that. It's like, I've got school coming up, but oh man, it just brings you right back.
You remember that and it was going down that Star Tunnel and everything?
Sure.
So that was like the first time that I saw Superman, and it was a 2-night event. Like, it was blown out to 3 hours, and I had never seen the movie before, so I didn't realize growing up later, because we didn't have easy access to home video back then. Like, the VCR was just coming into being.
So this is when you went to rent a movie, you also rented the player,
right,
and brought it home in that little suitcase.
Yeah, very few people.
That's how I saw Tron.
Right, exactly. And people were starting to get their own VCRs, but it was a slow process. And then there was the format war with VHS and Betamax. I don't even want to go into that. But the point is that the movies were more easily seen on the Sunday Night Movie than they were on home video. And so when you see it there for the first time, like all the Bond movies I saw on the Sunday Night Movie for the first time. And I don't want to belabor the point, but it was a place where a lot of kids went to see movies for the first time, was at home on the ABC Sunday Night Movie. So, because a lot of us didn't have cable either. So there was this 3-hour movie. Well, then when I grew up, I went and got Superman on Laserdisc because I hadn't seen it in so long. And I just remembered the music, and I remembered Christopher Reeve and all that kind of stuff. And it stuck with you because it was so just perfectly done. But then I watched the Laserdisc, and this was around the time that I started college. And it was around the time that I had access to the internet. And the Laserdisc didn't have scenes in it that I distinctly remember. There were scenes in the movie that I was like, wait, I know for a fact that Superman gets shot at by machine guns in the sewer, and it's not in the movie. Like, what's going on? And I know for a fact that in Superman 2, Zod's crony kills a little boy on horseback by throwing a siren light across the farm field at him. And that's not in my Superman 2 Laserdisc. Like, what's going on? So I went online and I started poking around, and there were some websites back then. One of them is still around. It's called Caped Wonder. It's all about the movies. And then there was another one, I think it was called the Superman Archive or something like that. And they outlined all of these changes that had happened to Superman and then went into where those changes originated from. And it all went back to the conflict that occurred between the Salkinds and Richard Donner, the director of Superman. And so for those of you that don't know, even though Warner Brothers owns DC Comics now and did back in 1978, the Superman movie rights were still up in the air. Anybody could just get them because DC Comics was there to negotiate with. And so these Russian film producers, the Salkinds, bought the rights to Superman to make movies with. And when they did, they were looking for a director. And first they got the guy who directed Goldfinger, but he was a tax exile from the UK, so he could only film in Italy. But Marlon Brando didn't want to film in Italy because the Italian Film Commission was trying to get him for Last Tango in Paris. And so they had hired Marlon Brando to play Superman's dad. And so they were like, well, we're going to film in England. Bye-bye, Guy Hamilton, director of Goldfinger. Hello, director Richard Donner. And he had just filmed The Omen. And so he was a hot commodity. And he was going to film 2 movies back-to-back. And he started filming right away. And he was working off Mario Puzo's script, for the guy who wrote The Godfather. Mario Puzo had then moved away from the project, and a few other writers had come on board and worked with it a little bit. And then he brought in his friend Tom Mankiewicz, and Tom Mankiewicz and he and Donner finessed the script even more. And so then after they did that, they started shooting, and they, of course, cast Christopher Reeve, and they had Gene
And
Hackman.
Donner had a vested interest in Superman. Like, he cared a lot about the project. It wasn't just like a job for him per se. It was something that he actually really was into and really cared a lot about getting it right.
Yeah,
right?
It was a passion project for him because he really – you see, you got to understand that, like, the Salkinds were just your –
And when we say the Salkinds, I just want to paint a picture for those of you listening who don't know what we're – so the Salkinds are a father and son, and their last name is Salkind. And the father is Alexander, and the son is Ilya. They're very Russian. And when you see in the behind-the-scenes documentary, at least the one that we watched the other night, Ilya, like, this was when he was a little older, he looks like the Russian mafia. I mean, these guys are like Tony Soprano, but Russian. And he all but has the pinky ring. He's got the gold chain. He's got like the hair that looks like he needs to be in Vegas in the 70s still. And he is just very, aggressive. Like, we're going to make a lot of money, and we're talking and wheeling and dealing, used car salesman with a lot of bling on. Just so picture all of that when we say the Salkinds. They're very pushy, mobstery type people, right?
Yeah, and their good buddy Pierre Spangler was the producer on the movie, and he had worked with them for many years. Their claim to fame had been the Three Musketeers movie with Michael York from the 70s that also starred Raquel Welch. And they had gotten into trouble with those actors and the director, Richard Lester, whose name will come back up in a minute.
Put a little pin in that.
Yeah, because...
Put a pin in Lester.
Because they filmed so much footage that after they got done releasing the Three Musketeers, the producers went back independently of Richard Lester and the actors and cut together a second movie.
Wow.
And then released that as well.
So they made a second movie out of stuff shot for the first movie.
And then the actors and the director
Again, another theme that we see within the Superman 1 and 2 thing.
Right.
I just love the little anecdotes about how he was constantly being told that they were running out of money, or that he was over budget, or that he was over time. And then nobody would ever tell him what his budget was, how much he was over budget, how much he was over time. And finally he was like, just, tell me that I have until tomorrow to do this, and I'll turn it in 9 months from now.
Right.
And that's just how it will be.
Yeah.
It's just like
He
it'll
did
take
not-
as long as it takes.
Right, and they did not get along. And in all fairness, they were independently getting backers and investors to come in, and they were continually having to sell more of the movie back to Warner Brothers to get more money to finish the production. But
And to put that in perspective, for this movie, they basically used every known type of special effects technology that they could get their hands on. So for every scene they actually had to sit down and figure out, okay, what do we need to make this scene work? And if that meant building miniatures, they built miniatures. If that meant animating something, they animated something. So, and they gathered that talent around. So it was certainly couldn't have been cheap to do that.
And the fact that they were adamant back then, because this was the pre-digital age, they were adamant that they did not want blue screen matte lines around Christopher Reeve when he was flying. They wanted Superman to feel like he was on the background. And that required very careful rear projection with very careful cinematography and lighting of Christopher Reeve in position. They used the Zoptic system, which was the mechanically synchronized dual zoom lenses to create the
So he could appear to be getting closer to the camera while the other scene was changing its depth as well.
Yes.
So that further pushed that illusion.
Exactly. And so all of that was very expensive. So I give the Salkinds some credit for having gone through a lot of development before Richard Donner ever came on the scene. They had been filming tests in Italy with Guy Hamilton. They had done flying tests, and they were not quite there yet. But,
those were fun to watch.
Yeah, they were cool.
They sure were.
But then Donner came on the scene, and he pulled everything together, pulled the story together, and then they started filming. But as you said, unfortunately, the producers and Donner didn't get along, and it started to become acrimonious. And
But you can't tell. I mean, that's just a testament to Donner. I mean, he put out a wonderful product.
Right.
And years later, he talks about how stressful, how lonely, how rough it was.
Right.
Because he both had to deal with that, have his own personal feelings about it, and keep Margot Kidder from being depressed. So it was just like how to play all these pranks on people.
Yeah, the weird thing about it is that as they were getting closer, they were filming them both at the same time. Like, it wasn't back to back like Back to the Future 2 and 3. They were actually at the same time. So they would film all the scenes.
Think Lord of the Rings movies.
Like all the Daily Planet scenes.
Right.
And then all of the Fortress of Solitude scenes.
Right. Well, that's even different from Lord of the Rings. Like, Lord of the Rings really focused on one movie at a time, but they were all filmed at the same time.
Right.
So some of the scenes cross-pollinated into production schedule, but not many. Whereas with Superman 1 and 2, it was like you just said, Aaron, it was all the Fortress of Solitude scenes for 1, and then we do all the Fortress of Solitude scenes for 2.
Because when you have Marlon Brando on set, you get all the Marlon Brando you can get.
Right, exactly. And so
there's a lot of reasons for
you
that.
You get more than you get than you wanted. But.
I mean, we should talk about Marlon Brando for just a second, because he's such a character, and he's so well known for being very, very difficult.
Well, he has top billing in the in the credits.
He does, and I love the story about when they go to talk with him about the part. And Michael, you probably remember it verbatim.
Yeah, he tried to convince Richard Donner that he should play Jor-El, Superman's father, as a bagel. And Richard Donner was like, what? And him and Elia Salkind were sitting there in his house, and he's like, well, just because he's raised his son to be a human so he'll fit in with humans, that doesn't mean Kryptonians are humans. They could be bagels. And he could even talk in electronic sounds. And all the people that had worked with Brando before had warned Richard Donner. They'd said, he's going to do anything he can to do as little work as possible and still get paid. Do not give him an inch. And so Richard Donner finally said, he said, because Marlon Brando's son kind of came running in at one point. He had a young son at that point, and he looked back at Donner and he said, aren't children just fascinating? And he said, yes. And he said, I bet you every child in America knows what Superman's father looks like, and it's not a bagel. And he was like, you got me, okay. And so he went to do the movie, but during the production of the film, he actually refused to memorize his lines because he felt like it sounded more realistic if all the lines were spontaneous, because he
But
said,
didn't he do that with a lot of films? Like, he was just known for not memorizing his lines.
Right.
They held up giant cue cards for
right,
him.
and you can see him kind of doing that in his scene by the spaceship on Krypton as well. He's kind of looking over things, and another funny little bit.
That whole scene was a little odd. I mean,
Yeah.
just from the perspective of I'm going to take my baby and put it around all these pointy things.
I know. I was like, giant glass. People who live in glass castles shouldn't sling babies.
Well, I
into
wrote
the
a note
sky.
down. I was like, do they live in the Death Star?
The glass Death Star.
As they walk through those corridors, the tubes that are coming up out of the ground, so not the stalagmites and stalactites, but the actual round things, have the same sort of rounded off light holes in them that you got on the Death Star. It was just brighter.
And that's because John Barry, who designed Star Wars, also designed Superman the movie. So there was a connection.
Same
there.
DNA.
Yeah. But it was interesting because Susanna York, who plays Lara, Jor-El's wife, she was a well-known British actress. She had been in the Battle of Britain and a number of other movies.
I thought you meant the actual Battle of Britain. I was like,
She was
whoa.
a real badass.
We're talking movies, not history tonight. And so she said Marlon Brando gets all these great lines to say farewell to his son, before they close the ship. She's like, doesn't the mother have anything to say? And they looked at her and they said, well, the mother isn't getting paid $1 billion a minute, to be Marlon Brando. So the mother just, you just need to
Nod and smile,
Nod and
honey.
smile.
Nod and smile.
No, that occurred to me, and it's probably because I'm used to more modern films where it's a more even distribution of dialogue. But I definitely noticed that, her whole role was just to sort of lovingly look at Jor-El while he placed the baby into the razor-sharp glass case.
I just assumed that he must beat her.
And I'm guessing that he
Because-
sent Kal-El to Earth because they had sent all the bad guys to Earth. Like,
Right.
he must have been like, okay, well, we fired all of them at Earth. I've got to send my baby to Earth.
Right.
Because I couldn't figure out why, of all the places that they would send all that window pane with all the bad guys in it.
They didn't send them to Earth. They didn't send them to Earth.
Oh, well, you could have fooled me
they
because
just-
Kal-El
They should've
passed
shown
him.
up.
He was like, "Burk, burk," on the way by, while Jor-El was like, the sign of 3 + 7 is important, son, and lizards are not tasty. And all that other good stuff he was telling him on the way to Earth.
Laying down some knowledge for us,
Yeah.
Aaron.
Yeah,
They
Laffy Taffy will be the best candy you ever eat.
the problem
This
that
is
they ran into
Sorry.
the problem that they ran into was as they missed their summer release window for part 1 in 78, Warner Brothers said, hey guys, can you maybe back off on doing 1 and 2 at the same time and just kind of put a pin in that and just finish 1? And they also said, we really like the special effect of Superman turning the Earth back, which was supposed to be the end of 2. And they said, but can you use that as the end of 1? And they were like, okay. So they reworked the script slightly for part 1, and they put the turning the Earth back ending on it. And then they released the movie to great fanfare, and it made a lot
Which
of
is
money.
probably why I kept wondering what happened to that first missile.
Right.
Like
right.
he just sort of it's gaining altitude and then he's suddenly just flying to California and he's already almost there.
Right.
And yet it still takes him, a minute and a half
Right.
to get to
'Cause
Margot
he throws
Kidder
the one
in
missile,
the crushing car of doom.
he throws the one missile into space, and then he turns around and sees the explosion of the San Andreas Fault with the second missile, and then he goes flying down and trying to fix
Well,
that.
I guess it's like an ICBM. He's already out there in space. It's a
Right.
much shorter path just to come straight down on California.
Right.
I get it. There's science here.
And also, I've also wondered, because Metropolis is basically in the position that New York City is in, because it is New York City.
Well, yeah, if you listen to and I have the benefit of having just watched the movie, when in the scene where the detective is getting on the train tracks and he's
Right.
kind of about to discover where Lex Luthor's lair is, if you listen to the train announcers, they're like the such and such to Newark. They're all trains that you would go to from New York
Right.
City.
One says Syracuse.
Yeah, a Buffalo. That's what it is.
Right. And so when he says it's when Lex Luthor says it's double jeopardy, Superman, you can't, even with your great speed, you can't catch 2 missiles at once. And it's like the one's going to San Andreas and the other one's going to Hackensack, New Jersey. And it's like, well, if you guys are in New York City, Hackensack, New Jersey is like half a second for Superman to fly over and grab it. He could just, Superman shouldn't be chasing that missile to Hackensack, New Jersey. He should be waiting for it, and then catching it and then throwing it and then going.
Just kind of boop it on the nose. Boop.
Right. He should be halfway. He should be, actually, let me take that back. He should be flying toward California to catch that missile and then throwing it up in the air, and then he keeps going. Now, someone will probably correct me in the comments and be like, well, technically he could be because of the direction.
Okay. Before we get corrected, those missiles would not hug the planet on their way to where they were going. They would actually go into low Earth orbit and then come straight back down.
Right.
So but that made it more exciting to me.
Sure.
Like actually seeing him chasing it over the tops of the hills and everything. It certainly gave the audience who didn't need to know that, especially in the 80s when everybody was terrified of that.
Let's not make them too real. I mean,
so here's what would really happen.
But so they finished one. It did really well. And then at that point, depending on what account you read or listen to, some say Richard Donner badmouthed the producers in a news article. Some say that the producers went behind Richard Donner's back and
From what I can see, Richard was not a pushover.
Right.
I think both of those things happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think he badmouthed them, and I feel probably rightfully so. And I definitely think that they just sort of basically fired him off the movie. But it does seem like, from what he had said, the Spengler...
Pierre Spengler?
Yeah, that guy, who now every single time he came up after that in the documentary, I'm just flipping off the screen. Like, I hate that guy. Donner said, I refuse to work with that guy. If he's going to be on the next movie, I refuse. I think that's what was said. And then they were like, well, bye-bye.
Yeah, because they were loyal to him, and so then they hired Richard Lester. And one of the things the documentary doesn't say is that one of the reasons they think they hired Richard Lester to replace Richard Donner is because they still owed Richard Lester for the Four Musketeers debacle, that second movie, and they owed him some...
This was horse trading.
Yes. And
there was a lot of that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Richard Donner only had 80% of Superman 2 finished. Now, that seems like a lot, but it's not enough to cobble together a full film. You got to get that extra 20%. But the Directors Guild said that in order for Richard Lester to have his name on the movie, he had to have filmed 51% of the movie, and it had to be fresh material. He couldn't refilm existing scenes. It had to be new pages of script. So they went back and rewrote a lot of Superman 2 to create new scenes.
Wow.
And then Richard Lester filmed that. And because Margot Kidder had been so outspoken in the media after Richard Donner was fired or not brought back, she kind of got put in the corner too. So in Superman 3, also produced by the Salkinds and directed by Richard Lester, she's not in the movie but for 2 minutes. And if you watch Superman 2, the theatrical cut directed by Richard Lester, some scenes will cut back and forth in reverses, like say it's a conversation between Lois and Lex Luthor. It'll be Richard Donner footage of Lois, then it'll cut to Gene Hackman, then it cuts back, and you can tell it's Richard Lester footage because her hair is completely frizzy and she has no makeup on. And you're going, my gosh, because see, the cinematographer on the original film, Jeffrey Unsworth, who died before the movie was released. He was a venerable British cinematographer.
2001.
Yeah, and he just amazing guy. And he was Margot Kidder tells stories about this, how when he would have her, he would work with a makeup artist to get her all dolled up, just right, and then they'd get ready to shoot her scenes or whatever, and he would demand silence on the set, and he would say, "I'm lighting the lady." And then he would...
God bless that man.
Oh, she still buzzes about it. She's just like, that was probably the best I ever felt. Like the prettiest I ever felt in my whole life.
I mean, who doesn't want someone to do that for them? I mean,
yeah.
God bless him.
I mean, he was a gentleman and a scholar, and he wasn't on part 2, the reshoots. And Richard Lester probably wasn't as careful. I think he came from television. And the Salkinds... they were having a beef with Margot Kidder anyway, so they probably weren't going to pay as much attention to her needs. And so you can actually see it. I mean, it is stark. It's like she says one line, she looks great. Gene Hackman says a line, it cuts back, and you're like, Crypt Keeper! Like, it's just really bad.
Poor Margot Kidder.
I know.
And Richard Lester put a lot of things in Superman 2 that were very chintzy. He was into camp. So there's a lot of gags in the movie that are very almost like the Adam West Batman series.
Yeah.
Like a roller skater with a sequin vest on being blown around the city streets.
I saw that when we just watched it upstairs.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is really kind of taking a turn.
And also, Richard Lester didn't know who Superman was. So unlike Richard Donner, who really loved the character, he was just like, Yeah, let's just have him throw a cellophane S at them in the Fortress of Solitude.
It kind of reminds me of the Batman series. Like, you know, I know a lot of people have problems with the not Danny Elfman.
Adam West?
No,
Oh.
the 1989.
Oh, Keaton.
Keaton. I was trying to think of the director's
Tim
name.
Burton?
Thank you. Danny Elfman, Tim Burton, same freaking guy. Just in case all of you didn't know that. You know that I have a name thing. Anyway.
That's an ongoing theme.
Tim Burton, Batman. A lot of people don't like the Tim Burton take on Batman. But when you get to, like, Batman and Robin,
Joel Schumacher.
then you're kind of taking a whole different level of departure from the material, which is kind of what it was making me think of.
Yeah. It is weird how those franchises both fall out because they actually have a similar path. So Superman, the movie, and then Superman 2 were both largely directed by the same guy, Richard
Right.
Donner. Batman and Batman Returns
Danny
were
Elfman.
They were directed by Tim Burton. Then you have the takeover director,
Val Kilmer.
Richard Lester, directing Superman 3.
Oh, right,
And
right.
then Joel Schumacher directing Batman Forever. And then by the fourth movie,
Billy Joel.
Seal.
Yeah, that's right. Seal.
By the fourth movie, the film is so bad, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Batman and Robin, that the franchise tanks, and they both have to take a multi-year break.
I always thought that in the Quest for Peace, he was throwing a sack of cigarettes into the sun. Like those nuclear missiles were so dingy and had the red on the end of them. It literally looked like he had just plucked cigarettes out of people's mouths.
Yeah.
And just chucked it into the sun. I mean, I knew that wasn't what he was doing.
Well, the fourth film wasn't done by the Salkinds. The fourth film was done by Golan Globus, the people that brought us Enter the Ninja, the live-action Masters of the Universe.
A lot of Chuck Norris movies.
A lot of Chuck Norris movies. Yeah, they actually subleased the rights from the Salkinds to make that film. So.
And they also got Christopher Reeve in the movie because they allowed him to play a behind-the-scenes. Was he a director or
he helped
producer?
write the story, and
okay.
I think he might have helped produce, but I can't remember that part. But I know he helped conceive the story of stopping the nuclear arms race, which
I
important
think
to
is
him.
kind of a cool idea that they work into the movie. It seems like a decent 80s plot for a Superman movie.
It's
but
not out of the question for Superman to do something like that.
Sure.
To play the babysitter.
But, you know, having him fighting the guy from the Rocky Horror Picture Show was probably a mistake.
You're talking about Nuclear Man?
Yeah.
Rocky. Yeah. Every single time he comes on screen, that's all I hear is Tim Curry. Rocky.
Yeah, the Superman 4 situation was too bad because everybody was calling in favors for everybody else. So like they were giving Christopher Reeve a chance to help write the story, and then Christopher Reeve was calling in his favors with Gene Hackman to beg him to come do the movie, and Gene only did it because Chris asked him to do it. And you know, then Christopher Reeve was promised that the United Nations scene where he declares he's going to stop nuclear proliferation was going to be a cast of thousands. And he gets in there and it's like a cardboard set with like 15 people. And he's just like, oh. And that's typical because that was at the end of
They
Cannon's.
Shatnered him.
Cannon was falling apart at that point. If you've watched the documentary Electric Boogaloo, that's around the time that they really overextended. And then suddenly all their loans were being called in and they couldn't make anything work. And so their promises were hollow. In the meantime, the Salkinds tried to reinvigorate the Super franchise with Supergirl, which once again, much like with Superman 3 and 4, the criticism is always Christopher Reeve is amazing, the rest of the movie's crap. Supergirl, the criticism always is Helen Slater as Supergirl is amazing, the rest of the movie's garbage. And they tried the same formula. You know, instead of Marlon Brando as Jor-El, they got Peter O'Toole to play Zoltar or Zoltan or whatever his name was. It's not exactly the same level of, you know, gravitas. And then they got, instead of Gene Hackman, they got Faye Dunaway to play this evil villainess.
A witch?
Yeah, she's like someone who wants to be a witch or whatever.
She's like the witch from a fairy tale is what she reminds me of.
Yeah, it's...
So
Who's the fairest of them all?
Your comment about, you know, why this reminded me so much of Star Wars now makes this note I took. This makes so much more sense to me. Better Star Wars than we're getting right now, which was from the opening scene where they were, you know, playing dun, 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 and they were coming up on the sun and they went through the flares and then they were going across the surface of the planet. I was just like... I just wait for a Star Destroyer to come in from the top.
Yeah, and the opening...
The John Williams score probably also
John Williams
contributed to
score for the original Superman is one of the greatest pieces of music ever composed, ever in the history of ever. And the title sequence for that movie, with the words come flying in with the blue outlines.
It's long.
That title sequence, they say, actually cost more than an average character movie back then. Like your average just non-special effects movie back then cost less than that title sequence.
But don't you think it's interesting? When we were watching it the other day, I thought it's so memorable from when we were kids watching that. Those words come on the screen, and it reminds me of Star Wars because the opening crawl is so distinctive visually with the words, maybe not the names of characters because that doesn't happen, but it's more the words floating through space. But it's the same thing where they had to come up with an effect to convey a whole lot of information at the opening of a film. And it's really normally not done. Like when we recently watched the new Blade Runner 2049 the other night, there's that whole thing at the beginning, which there's just like the description of the backstory real quick on the screen and just sort of mimicking. Spoilers from the very first scene.
I didn't know that.
So it's the same font, but I mean, that's as close as I can think of something like that happening. Words, that many words on a screen, it's like, I'm bored now, like instantly bored.
Well, it relies on the score to carry you through that. I mean, because it really does.
True.
I mean, we've talked about this before amongst each other. When's the last time you've seen a movie where the score actually had a memorable chorus or something you could hum after the fact? And that doesn't mean you don't like it. Like, Hans Zimmer is very famous right now, and he does write some very emotional, compelling music. But it's not necessarily something you're going to be...
Not real hooky.
Yeah, you're not going to be driving down the road being like, boom, boom.
I do.
Sorry, listeners at
Well, and also...
you don't have a subwoofer.
You brought up the Star Wars opening sequence versus Superman. The one thing that a lot of people might not know is that George Lucas got in a lot of trouble for the Star Wars opening sequence. The film guilds went after him, and they fined him tons of money because there were rules back then that said every actor and certain crew members that are of a certain billing have to be credited at the beginning of the movie. And because you didn't do that, we're going to fine you. And that's part of the reason why he left the Directors Guild of America and he left the Motion Picture Arts Association and all that kind of stuff. He just said, to heck with you guys. You don't care about art. You care about corporatizing everything. And, obviously Superman didn't have that problem because they had every name up front, but they made it so dynamic with the flying letters and stuff that you're not bored. I mean, the music's so good. The visuals are so cool. If you had the misfortune of seeing Superman Returns, you'll know that the best part of Superman Returns is the opening credit sequence because they use the music and they do the credits the same way. And it's just so much fun.
Interestingly, Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner, did not have opening credits.
Right.
Which I thought was...
Seriously.
You can go sit in the corner and cry.
No.
Okay. But so why do you think that they don't use the standard themes from these like Star Wars obviously still somewhat uses at least the melodies, so they're mimicking it. Like, hey, remember this? Remember how cool this was? Feel the same feelings.
Who directed 8?
Which one? Rian Johnson?
Rian Johnson. Someone asked him how he did the music for 8, and he said, I just handed it to John Williams.
Oh, well, that's good.
It's like, that's how you do this.
I guess my point is, why did they not do that with, like, the Superman, Batman type? I mean, why did they just sort of leave all of those very successful, iconic interpretations of the characters? Not just, I mean, obviously they hate the costumes and they hate the way the characters are written, but they also apparently hate the very classic scores of both of those films, which were very distinctive and very successful. And it's what we all automatically think of when we think of Batman and Superman. Am I right? Like, you think of Superman's theme from the movie, the original Christopher Reeve Superman, and you think of the Danny Elfman score from Batman, right? I do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they used it in the animated series for
exactly.
Batman. Part of it is to do with Hollywood ego, I think, because everybody has to get their own fingerprint on something, and then they get an opportunity. So, like, some of it has to do with licensing rights. I mean, the Superman animated series, which came right after the Batman animated series, which was done by the same people that did the Batman series, they abandoned the John Williams theme. They didn't use it, and that was weird. It was like,
yeah, but didn't they use the Batman theme for the Batman series?
They did,
Yeah.
but not using the Superman theme for the Superman series was odd. It was like, oh, okay.
Do you think it was a money thing?
I don't think so. I feel
it can be. I mean, it could very well have still belonged through some licensing arrangement to the Russian brothers, or who knows.
Well, it's Warner Brothers Music now because the Salkinds have given everything over the last 20 years to them. They've sold all their stake in it.
It's just Ilya now. Alexander is
no more.
It's departed
possible.
this mortal coil.
It's possible that maybe Hollywood composers feel that bombastic themes are passé. Maybe they feel like, I don't know.
Well,
no doubt. I tend to think that was a feeling, especially in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the rise of Hans Zimmer, because Hans Zimmer's certainly been around for a long time, and he used to write more bombastic themes, but I mean, from like Thin Red Line, the Christopher Nolan stuff that he did, I think that really struck a nerve, and it really was very effective where it was used. I think he actually did Blade Runner 2049 as well. So, there's definitely...
I loved that score.
Yeah, and so it
spoilers.
comes something from it.
Bonk.
Right. So, here's the thing. It's like, you have your favorite painters. Some of them use pointillism and put dots. Some of them use broad brushes. Some of them paint very realistically. We all like different things about that, but sometimes when someone gets popular, suddenly everybody paints like them. And I think that happened after Hans Zimmer kind of made that breakthrough after Gladiator or somewhere around there, where everybody tried to, we saw the fall of Elfman, and I'm getting way too emotional.
No, I
think that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I feel like they think that Superman himself is passé. You said that they thought the music might be passé. And I think that they just generally have a contempt for Superman himself, the character.
Yeah, if you look at the new movies, they're terrible. I mean, the movies are, as far as Superman is concerned, deplorable. They're deplorable films.
If you took that Superman that we just watched and you stuck him in these movies and had him reacting with the Batman that we have now, with the worlds that he's in, that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you would have that, because there's something about Clark Kent. I know you can't, I don't know how you would get whatever he had back, but this sense of being lost, but kind of behind it all, not really afraid of anything. I mean, I don't think that he would have gone any of the directions that the current Superman would have gone.
No.
I mean, he turned back time to save one person.
Right.
Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I mean, it just seems a little strange, and this has been beat to death,
right,
that he would allow whole cities to be destroyed.
Right.
And it just seems like there were other interesting stories to tell, like we talked about the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Like him and Batman, like him constantly being like, Batman, man, cheer up. And then Batman like totally just taking him down a peg, and then them both going back and forth. It just seems like that would be intriguing.
It's like what you said, I believe, was that Superman being Superman in a dark world is fine.
Yeah.
A dark Superman in a dark world does not work.
It's
a dark
depressing.
Superman in a light world doesn't work. Superman has to be Superman, and the world around him is his challenge. It's not him being the challenge himself.
Well, I mean, it makes sense if he's around all of that. I could see him getting beat down. Like, I could see the Clark Kent character just being totally lost and not knowing what to do. I could see Superman being rebuffed at every turn, and at some point just kind of saying, you know what, I'm out.
But see, I think that's where a lot of people, we were watching it, and you're seeing Clark Kent on his first day at the job, and everyone's treating him like crap, and he's just sort of bumbling through, and you're kind of feeling really sorry for this guy. And you're thinking, it's amazing that he's experiencing all these things and he still wants to help humanity, because honestly, after being treated that way and seeing how humans treat each other, why would you even want to save them? It's like the Fifth Element. It's like, when I see what you do to each other, why should I save you?
Chicken.
And well, deep pass, but he does, and that's because he's Superman. Because he puts he has a moral compass that's just completely unshakable.
Well, he's got a secret, and you can see that. And I was going to see what you guys thought were your favorite scenes in the movie, and the one that comes to my mind is the scene where they get mugged in the alleyway, and he's that guy's meat, But Super, oh no, I maybe you should give him the purse, and she's just like, she kicks him in the head. And the thing that I loved the most about that scene was, well, there's two things. The one was the little smirk he gave when he dropped the bullet of like to me, that's why he saves everybody, is because he has that. That's his joke. That's his secret, is that he's secretly the most powerful thing in the world. But The other thing is, okay, let's put ourselves in that position. Any one of us get mugged. They actually pull the trigger and shoot. Someone from another planet saves us by catching a bullet. We don't know that. We're immediately going to call the police. We're going to get on Facebook and we're going to post about it. We're going to take a PTO day tomorrow because we are just shook up and we can't take it.
Week.
She's like, all right, see you later, Clark. Like, whatever, just shrugs it off and moves on.
How much of a badass she is. She's such a New York or metropolis chick that she's unshaken by this thing.
Well, props to her for that, but sometimes I wonder, is that not who we were in the 80s more so?
Yeah, I
like
think
a little more resilient, a little less, everybody look at what just happened to me and tell me how strong I am. It was more like, yeah, I got mugged on the way home. Want a burger?
I kicked him in the face.
Kicked him in the face. She has no idea
Pass
that Clark saved him. She thinks the guy missed.
Right.
So
my favorite scene is the part where Superman's dad, not Jor-El, his Earth dad.
Yeah.
Hey, spoiler alert. He has a heart attack in the driveway. It's not really a driveway. But anyway, he has a heart attack. And the actor who does that
Glenn
scene.
Ford.
So amazing.
It was.
Where he walks up and he starts, you see his hand come up and he starts holding it and he goes, oh no.
Yeah.
And then he literally doesn't say anything else, but you get like a paragraph from his facial expression alone,
Yep.
and it's very fast. And then you literally see what it feels like the light goes out in his face, like you literally see him die, and then he drops to the ground off camera. And it's like, that was acting, people. I mean, he conveyed, like, I wanted to do so much more, and I don't want to leave my family, and all, like, he conveyed all of that with a
All I
look.
just heard screaming in his face is, it can't be time. It can't be time.
I know.
wanted more.
I needed so much more time to do all
Because
this.
he looks up at the porch and then he looks at the barn.
He looks at the barn, and he's like doing this assessment. He's like, I know I'm going to die right now. And
I haven't seen that in a movie.
I was just like,
since the last time I saw this movie.
just crying. I'm sitting there like an idiot, and I'm like, "Don't look at me, Michael," because I'm just like sitting there weeping.
That's part of the brilliance of the acting and the casting in this movie is that Glenn Ford played Clark's father, Pa Kent, and that man was an acting powerhouse for decades before he did Superman the movie. I mean, he was in the famous. Remember in Shawshank Redemption when they're watching that movie, Gilda, with Rita Hayworth, and the guy in the room with Rita Hayworth, that's Glenn Ford. You know, he's been in movies forever, and he's a brilliant actor. So
Clearly.
if anyone could do it, I mean, you got Marlon Brando, you've got Gene Hackman, you've got Glenn Ford, you've got Jackie Cooper playing
he was
Perry
amazing
White.
too.
I mean, all these guys are veterans.
Well, so what's your favorite scene in the movie?
Oh, gosh.
It's about 2.5 hours long.
And I just watched the 3-hour cut again. They just released the Sunday night movie 3-hour cut on Blu-ray, and I just watched that again.
Yeah, I got to get you to tell me a little bit more about what you think about that on a second viewing. But first, I do want to hear what your favorite moment is.
My favorite moment probably is always going to be the helicopter rescue. I mean, I just love seeing him reveal himself, and then he, flies up and he catches the. And I think my favorite moment in that is where you see all the news reporters, and they're waiting for this woman, they don't know who she is, who's falling out of the helicopter. It's Lois. They're waiting for her to die because she's just she can't hold on any longer. And then that Williams score, dun 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 dun, he goes woof, and then they're like, "What the hell is that?" And then he catches her, and everyone's just like, "What the hell is going on?" And he's the only one that's got it all together.
I got you.
Yeah,
who's got you?
It's a brilliant scene, and it's probably the best superhero scene in movie history. Like, as far as like one moment where that defines what a superhero is and does.
I'll buy that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Like, I do like, Batman coming crashing out of the skylight in the art museum and saving Vicky Vale, but it's not the same gravitas. I liked the newest Wonder Woman scene where she gets up into no man's land in World War I and she says, I'm going to stop this stalemate or whatever. And she walks out into this machine gun fire. But it still doesn't have the gravitas of him catching that helicopter. I mean, it was, I don't know, the music worked. Christopher Reeve's performance cannot be understated. Like,
I was prepared to remember it in a comic way, because it was something from my childhood.
Right.
And then watching it now as an adult, I was taken by the performance. And, you know, there are those moments where you're like, oh, those tights are kind of funny or whatever. But then you're like, well, I wouldn't laugh at that guy.
No.
Because, you know, he stands there and you're just going, you know what? Good on you.
But you know what's funny to me is like when I was watching it, I was expecting to have so much more of an emotional reaction to the film itself because I watched it so many times on TV as a kid. And I remembered a lot of it, but it didn't. I mean, it was just sort of a weird experience. But when we watched a lot of the documentaries and it was showing, like the first time I saw Christopher Reeve in the documentary, we watched that before we actually watched the movie, I just started crying because it's just him. It's not even, I mean, it's him as Superman, but it's just him as a human being.
Between takes.
But just it made me think of him and think of what an amazing guy he was and all the things that he did. And I mean, it's just like.
He's one of those larger than life people. When you see him in a group photograph, I mean, you're just like, that guy right there. Who is that? Because I mean, it's just, he can't blend into a crowd. I mean, he's just big, the hair. I mean, he would probably still had some makeup on from the movie that I saw, but he is someone that you would probably look at and go, that needs to be an actor.
Well, there's a pretty funny story in the opposite direction, though.
Fantastic.
From the actor who played Non, Zod's big guy. His big.
Yeah, he's super chatty.
I believe his name is Jack O'Halloran.
Could not get him to be quiet.
And he tells a story about how Christopher Reeve was a young actor. He was fresh out of Juilliard, and he.
You just said Juilliard, right?
Right. Yeah.
Are you saying Christopher Reeve went to Juilliard or the other guy went to Juilliard?
Christopher Reeve went to Juilliard, I believe.
I mean, anybody goes there, right?
Wasn't he roommates with Robin Williams or something? If I recall?
That I don't know.
Anyway, he was talking about how this was a few years ago. He did an interview, and
Put it in that answer machine.
He was talking about how Christopher Reeve was, you know, a method actor. You know, Margot Kidder talks about how he was Superman on set all the time, and he took the role very seriously.
That had to get old.
And apparently,
I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have that beer.
Apparently, after they got done shooting one day,
Michael, can you correct your posture? You could injure your back that way.
I'd like to go in and say that Michael is correct, that they did go to Juilliard and they met in 1973. They were roommates, Christopher Reeve and Robin Williams. Good job, Michael.
Michael, a good memory is a sign of a healthy mind.
And so Jack O'Halloran, who played Non, his family had like mafia ties. Like
more mafia ties.
And
how did he get in this movie?
Christopher Reeve found out about that, and I guess after work one day they were all at a restaurant or something, and Christopher Reeve was just kind of gabbing at the mouth about, oh yeah, Jack over there, apparently his family's, you know, connected and all this kind of stuff. So the next day, you know, because Jack's a big guy, like even with Christopher Reeve working out, the guy playing Non is a big dude. He came walking onto the set, and Christopher Reeve was standing there. I think he was in his Superman outfit, and he just barreled onto the set, and he just grabbed him and like lifted him up like Darth Vader did to that officer in the beginning of Star Wars. And he's like, "You ever talk about my family again, I'm going to wipe the floor with you."
Wow.
Yeah.
Speaking of Darth Vader, did you see that Dave Prowse, the guy who actually was in the suit for Darth Vader, was the one who bulked up Christopher Reeve for the training of... Yeah, it was really cool. We're watching the documentary, and apparently when Christopher Reeve originally auditioned and read for the part, he was doing a play. He had sort of slimmed down because he had been a jock in high school, real big, bulky guy, but he had slimmed down to do a lot of acting to make him a little more versatile and less, you know, bow-hunky. And...
my name's Tim.
And so they were like, well, you know, unfortunately, you're just not quite bulky enough to sell the part. Although you did a great job after
you lift, bro.
And then he was like, no, I mean, I can bulk up pretty fast. And so then it cuts to a scene, and it's like Dave Prowse. And I'm like, oh, my God, it's Darth Vader. And Michael's like over there nodding knowingly because, of course, he already knows all of this. And he's just like, yeah, that's totally true. And I'm like,
We need an animated Michael now.
Yes, that is correct. That happened that way.
It's totally true.
Yeah, it's cool little stories like that really sell that movie, and as a timepiece. Like now, like you said, the movies themselves, Superman 1 and 2, are not perfect films. They have weird things that are dated. They have compromised storylines because of all the drama behind the scenes. But the actual story of the production of them is even more compelling now than it was then, because now we do have 3 different cuts of the first movie. We have 2 different cuts of the second movie.
Because
almost as many as Blade Runner.
Right. Because they came back, right? And they asked Donner to, hey, come back in. You can re-edit all of this. You can sort of have your opportunity to fix these things. And, of course, he jumped at the chance.
Does Donner do the director's commentary on that disc? Okay, because I found it shortly after the death of Clark's dad, needing eye bleach or brain bleach from that moment. I started skipping through the audio tracks because I was watching on my computer, and they weren't labeled. So they were just like track 1, track 2, track 3. And so I was having a really good time changing Clark Kent's mom's voice to like the French, So she's like, Clark, how's it going to do? And then she goes to German, then she goes to Spanish, then she goes to something else. And it was just like, that's kind of funny. Because, it's not like I understand everything. And then I got to the director's commentary and realized, oh, now I have to watch this movie again. But I can't do it before I go to the podcast.
Yeah, the print or the negative, for Superman the movie back in '98, I guess it was. Warner Brothers did a anniversary roadshow, and they brought out all their big movies for a roadshow around the biggest cities in the United States, and they had a multi-day program, and you could figure out when like Adventures of Robin Hood was playing, and you could go see it, and they did them in chronological order. And I went to see Superman the movie at Phipps Plaza as part of the Warner Brothers Roadshow, and I was actually shocked myself at how bad the print looked.
Really?
And I was like, yeah, it was faded, and the colors were off, and something was. I was like, wow, this.
Well, they talk about you were talking about Unsworth. It is one of his hallmarks to record things in a slightly fuzzy, almost like the way you remember things. Look to it. So you're saying it was further beyond
that. And that's what makes it so challenging to be able to tell with Superman if the movie's been restored, because of Unsworth's very signature gauzy, glowy kind of soft lighting. But it was bad, and they were on the internet talking about it at the time. They were like, yeah, the Superman negative is in bad shape. The print we struck off of it for the roadshow revealed how bad the negative is. And so our letter writing campaign started, because there was no real – the internet was around, but it wasn't taken as seriously as it is now. And everybody was supposed to send in signatures to get the movie saved. And I was a freshman in college at Syracuse at the time, and so I went before the dormitory council and asked for permission to set up a table down in the lobby on a Saturday, and I sat up a table and I made a big Superman S, and I made a sign that said your signature could save Superman, and I put my TV down there with the movie playing. Like,
so you're in front of the council, and they were all like, guilty.
So they let me. Well played.
He was in a big ring, and it was
and they was like, ooh,
spinning.
Oscillating.
Yeah,
oscillating.
You will bow down before me.
He was just yelling it to people as they walked by. You will bow down before me.
But
could be my second in command.
But it was
like,
cool
Nerd.
because a lot of people signed it. They were like, "What's going on?" I said, "Superman's deteriorating. We got to do something." And then my film professor, Lester Friedman, was personal friends with David Newman, who was one of the writers on Superman the movie. And so I got him to sign his own page, and I sent that whole ream of paper into Warner Brothers. A lot of us across the country were doing it, and the movie was restored. And when it was, Donner was brought in, and they said, "Hey, would you like to do your final definitive cut of Superman the movie for DVD?" And he said, yeah. And so they restored it for DVD.
One of the things that's very Donner that I didn't realize I missed about filmmaking is brought out in the funeral scene. So you have this guy who was clearly kind of a powerhouse in the town. I mean, he was a respectable guy, didn't seem to have any problems or other qualms. Somebody that you would imagine at the local church or community would have been well liked.
2 people came to his funeral.
2 people. In a lot of modern movies, it's like it doesn't matter the size of the town or who it is. They do the funeral scene. There's like 300 people there, and even watching some of the Marvel movies with Daredevil or something, you see funeral scenes. There's just a lot of people there.
Everybody loves a funeral.
Yeah, and so I thought it was kind of nice that was downplayed and left personal. I mean, even to the little note where the gravediggers tipped their hats, and Clark didn't quite know what to say to his mom, and he tried to, gave her a rose, and they walked out. It was just kind of a nice moment.
Right.
That wasn't spoiled by trying to shove it in my face or try to play the emotion up too much.
One of the criticisms of Superman the movie, though, is that it's 3 movies put together.
Yes.
You have this very artsy Krypton.
Who wrote it?
What?
Who wrote it or started writing it?
Mario Puzo.
Yeah. This is not new for this guy.
So you've got the Krypton scene, then you've got the Kansas material, and then which they said they modeled after a Wyeth painting, and then you
could feel that
almost a screwball comedy with the Metropolis stuff. And the critics at the time were like, I mean, the actors are brilliant, but the movies feel very disjointed. Like it feels like it transitions between 3 movies.
Oh, it would have been a miniseries now.
It's kind of like the first Christopher Nolan Batman.
Expound.
Oh, that movie is 2 movies just ran together. There's the whole beginning part where we reestablish his mythology, and then he goes and he has the whole monks thing. That's a whole movie. And then he comes back, and there's this other weird plot line that starts like halfway through the movie that I never understood what was happening. And then it's just really dark, and he drives like a tank, and then everything blows up. Like, that is a whole separate movie, which I would say is vastly inferior to the first movie that's the first half of the movie.
Okay, we're going to start a new show, which is just you describing a movie.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
Just Coke, rum, camera.
And by Coke, we mean cocaine.
No.
Michael,
Yes.
what do you think of the 3-hour cut of Superman?
Well, it just came out on Blu-ray through the Warner Archive collection. Talk about a real cash grab. I mean, that wasn't put together by Donner. That was put together by the Salkinds, because back then, when we didn't have cable and broadcast TV was the only game in town, you got more money based on how many commercials you could fit into the event. And so the Salkinds knew that, and so they said, let's make Superman as long as we can make it. And so they made it 3 hours, because that means more commercial breaks, which means more money for them, and put it over a 2-night event. And they put every single trim and added take back in there. So like when young Clark is walking to the North Pole, I mean, they use every single B-roll shot.
So like they actually have shots of him walking through fields and then some woods.
Yes. And then a glacier foothill, and then the glacier itself, and then the...
What about that awkward polar bear that was like...
Oh, yeah, that's still in there. Everything that was in the original is in there, and then you have all this other stuff, like added lines, and I can't tell you how long you watch Ned Beatty walk through the city and then through the subway station and with the cops following. I mean, it's forever. Now, there's some cool stuff in there.
That was shocking, by the way. I mean, it's just like straight up murder. Like, I'm bored. Murder this man.
That's
And
right.
then he falls in front of that train. And of course, I guess I'm trained by a lot of stuff I've seen since then, but I was just like, oh, I don't want to see this. And all you really get is the hat with the tear in it.
Right.
But, I mean, he just casually pushes him off the ledge.
And then Miss Tessmacher says, sick. You really sick?
She was interesting.
What was the relationship between Lex Luthor and Miss Teschmacher?
That was done in a way that, depending on the experience of your mind, you could draw whatever conclusion you wanted. So to me as a kid, she was like just an assistant. And now I was more like, oh, I don't know.
I mean, clearly she was like I always thought she was a love interest, or, you know, maybe not love, but she was there for his girlfriend, whatever.
But she was also useful.
He was. Do you call your girlfriend like Miss Teschmacher?
Do you fire a nuclear missile at your girlfriend's mom?
Possibly. I mean, your mother-in-law, maybe. Oh, mother-in-law jokes. We've really gone to the very bottom, everybody.
I most certainly do not do that.
Okay, so I really enjoyed the immense amount of product placement that was in these movies.
Oh, I didn't pick up on most of it.
Ooh, lordy. So the first one...
TDK. No, wait, that's something else. Go ahead.
It was great because, do you remember, like, right after Pa Kent dies... And Ma Kent, it was great. And Ma Kent she's getting some breakfast for Clark, and she's calling him, and she makes him a nice big bowl of Cheerios.
And I remember
that Cheerios
thinking,
box
that box
was so
has not
lit.
changed.
It was lit like perfectly and just centered in the screen, and it just kept being there from room to room as she was carrying it in the way so that she's holding it so you could see what it says.
With the swelling music.
That's
and
right.
She's actually staring at her son who's decided to leave and tell her not by telling his mom he's going to leave, but by waiting on the top of a hill until the sun rose.
That's right. And then he's like, she's like, here, honey, I made you some Cheerios. And you can see through this window that's like this old lady looking out with this wistful look with Cheerios is the center and it's lit more than her. And then she walks out and her husband has just died. And he's like, bye-bye. I gotta go. So good luck with that.
Part of that I think was different times too.
I guess, but it's like, couldn't you have given her a couple of weeks to get over the death of her husband?
He sent half of his paycheck home to her. I mean, he was a good guy.
Yeah, but that was like 12 years later.
That is true. I thought it took a lot of time for that space technology to give him the experience he needed to then go back out.
It's a lot of
I think they just needed him to be 30 when he went.
I think that's true.
They're like, how can we make him through 12 years? Okay, it's going to take us 12 years to go through this planetarium ride.
It's pretty sad that the kid who played him as a teenager, they totally took his voice away and dubbed over him, and they didn't tell him, so he goes to the screening, he walks in, and he's just like, oh my God, they just completely cut out all of my voice. He seemed pretty brokenhearted about that.
Well, who wouldn't be? I mean, he had a lot of screen time for the film. I mean, you don't see Christopher Reeve until an hour into the movie.
I know. I made a note of that. I was like, wow, that was a brave choice.
Yeah, but I mean, that was Richard Donner's vision. I mean,
But then in the second movie, there's the fight scenes in the streets. It's just like the guy gets thrown into the Coca-Cola sign, and there's like the Marlboro truck there, and I felt like I was watching the new Ghostbusters movie, where there was just product placement everywhere.
With the lack of Donner, there was no gatekeeper between what they wanted to do, what they wanted to sell, and then putting it in the movie.
Right.
That's
and I'm sure Donner would have been like, no, because he was clearly, there was something very painterly about the Superman. Mm-hmm. It just felt like a vision that was executed on painfully to the extent of inventing new technologies. I do have to add that one of the things that scared me the most when I was a kid, since this is October and it's a scary month, was Lois Lane falling into that crevice in the car.
Oh my God!
And
is that
slowly
terrifying?
I was watching it today, and all I kept hearing was "buried alive."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I as
that
a child,
scared me so much. As a
nothing
kid.
else in that movie terrified me as much as that moment.
That I agree with you 100%.
With the dirt falling and her mouth open, she really sold.
Yeah,
she did.
Yeah,
and then him picking her lifeless body up out of the dirt. Oh, that was very terrifying. And then in the second
his
movie,
acting there was great too. I mean, it wasn't Pa Kent, but there was pain.
But, oh sure, no, he did a great job.
He almost dropped her though. Squeaked a little bit.
You're saying the second.
The second movie, the bad guys were just, as a kid, they were terrifying to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't like to see Superman powerless. I was really angry when he decided to give up his powers. I was like, what are you thinking? Even like...
Angel reference, like when Angel throws the ring under the pier.
I was about to make a Buffy reference. I was.
Why would you do that?
I know. It's like...
No, not why would you make a Buffy reference.
But why would you make the choice? Like, even Buffy never made that choice of like, look, we are superheroes. It is our job. All these other people depend on us. It is not about our happiness. And that is sort of the pain of being that person. And that's the pain of being Superman, is he has to put everyone else before him all the time.
In the defense of that, just to go back to something I said earlier, that would be the moment where he goes, you know what, guys, I'm out. I mean, he did it for a different reason in that movie, I think, but it is just sort of him taking the mantle off and walking away. And it was kind of cheap that he could just go get it back. But
right. And that's where the Donner cut of Superman 2 and the Lester cut kind of cross paths, because the Donner cut of Superman 2, he gets his powers back not only by finding the green crystal, but also having a direct encounter with Marlon Brando, his dad. And his dad actually, through the power of that crystal or whatever soul is left of his in the universe, he gives it to his son to stop Zod. But he says, as soon as I do this, you'll never see me again because I'll have expended all of my energy. But I'm doing this to restore you.
So there was a great cost associated with that.
Right. Whereas in the Lester version, the Donner version, unfortunately, is one that's never going to be finished. So when you're watching it, you're really just watching a refined work print that's kind of been stitched together. But the Lester version, he literally just goes back to the Fortress.
That's something we do here at RetroBlasting, though.
What's that?
Watch work prints.
True.
with popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
He just goes back to the Fortress of Solitude in the theatrical version of Superman 2, and he just finds the green crystal there, and then he just looks at it, and then the next thing you know, he's flying through the streets of Metropolis, and you're like, wow, he's back somehow, magically. Hooray!
It's the power of bleach.
Yeah. So it's... it's unfortunate that we're never going to see the Superman 1 and 2 saga that would have ended with the turning back of the Earth at the very end of Superman 2. Because the idea behind that was Zod and the criminals from Krypton are so destructive that the only thing Superman can do, because it is his fault by throwing that missile that they were released from the Phantom Zone, he's like, the only thing I can do to save them.
Why was the Phantom Zone that close to Earth?
It was floating through space. Yeah, I know.
Space is big.
It's called.
There's a lot other. I mean, like I have control of this immensely powerful and enlightened society. I'm going to fling this Phantom Zone at Earth.
Well, I don't think they
well, no, it just sort of like skipped over the planet like a nickel.
Right.
But I mean, I just was like, I'm serious. I mean,
right.
Superman literally in
it
his
was
little
just the
chrysalis.
angle of Krypton at the time, like when both of them were jettisoned off the planet. That was just the angle.
Well, he was
which,
propelled and he was aimed.
Well, he
They
was
knew
aimed,
where he was going.
But
if he hadn't thrown the missile, they would have just gone right by Earth too and been stuck there forever.
That's true.
So
there's
That's
a lot
true.
of things where people go back in time, but when they go back in time, it doesn't literally go back in time. It's like only certain parts of it
I know
go back
I'm
in time.
picking on a comic book movie, but I just feel like, I mean, it's they should have done everything in their power. There was 360 degrees more that they could have chosen from. And it's
I think we're both nitpicking.
Earth.
I kept saying things like during the movie, I was like, well, so if he's rewinding time and he's going back to like before, I don't know, to save Lois, like he's going back in the first movie, then isn't the earthquake still going to happen? Like he's getting there to her before the fault thing cracks
Oh, it
open.
still happens. I mean, because she talks about it when she gets out of the car.
Because she's saying that there's still signs of an earthquake. So clearly he didn't stop. He didn't go back far enough to stop the missile from hitting the fault.
right, but yet he went back
yet
far
he
enough to
goes
prevent
back
the
far
dam
enough.
from breaking. And
Actually,
But
the
how did he
dam's
manage to
still
do it
broke, I
this
think.
time? There's still only a finite amount of time, and there's I don't know. It just didn't make sense. And
yeah,
then
it doesn't.
And then he leaves
Let's
her
get some
there
graph
with the
paper.
car. She's standing right on the fault where there's the danger zone. Jimmy Olsen comes running up, and he's like, all right, well, it seems like you're all okay. Bye-bye. And then the fault is about to open again. Don't leave her there.
This is why, because you see the dam repair itself, and yet Jimmy Olsen's still where Superman left him.
That's right.
So what I'm saying is this is why a studio should not intervene with a pre-planned script.
Sure.
Because,
That's true.
Because the way the movie was supposed to end was Superman catches the one missile and throws it, but he doesn't get to the other missile in time, as in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he swoops down and he fixes the fault. And that was going to be the big moment, was him fixing the San Andreas fault by lifting it back up into place.
Right.
And then after that, he was going to go get Lex Luthor, and Lois wasn't going to die. Like, there wasn't anything like
Right.
that. He gets Lex Luthor, and he dumps him in prison. And then you see that missile continuing to fly, and it hits the Phantom Zone, and the criminals come out, and they say, free! And then they head towards the nearest planet, which is Earth, and then it says, to be continued in Superman
Question
2.
mark?
Why wasn't
Yeah.
it like Saturn?
Look, man, I just...
I just work here.
So it would have been a cliffhanger that would have continued in Superman 2. And I think that would have been a lot
would have
better.
been a lot better. I
And
agree.
then Superman 2, the Earth going backwards doesn't have as many broken problems because...
Sure. Well, because he's doing it to save everyone
Right.
that was hurt during their...
Right.
Well, and I feel
Right.
like
Yeah.
they were developing this theme because they echoed it more than once, which was his dad literally telling him, you only need to lead. You are not to interfere with their history. So the act of him going back in time, I have to imagine, would have been a very scary... I'm directly going against what my dad said. I'm changing history.
You know,
I'm just going to change it this little bit to get her back. Because you can't, I mean, okay, I know once again we're talking about a comic book movie, but I can't imagine that even with him repairing the fault and doing what he did, nobody was hurt or killed in all of that happened.
Right, but that's the whole thing because his father says that it's forbidden for you to interfere with human history.
Right.
So he wouldn't have in Superman
The
1,
only
but he did in
thing-
Superman 2.
I feel like he did in Superman 1, and I have a really big problem with that whole thing, which Michael and I discussed ad nauseum the other night when we were watching this, because interfering in human history, it's the same thing as the Prime Directive people. It's like, don't get involved in their culture. They're not as evolved as you are. You can't change the course of their history. I feel like that's what he was saying. Don't change the
But
course of their
he
history.
literally set the rule.
But him being there changes the course of their history. Him saving anyone, him intervening to save Lois during the cool helicopter crash scene thing is interfering with our history. So if you're going to do any, you got to do it all. Like, you can't pick and choose. It's a very gray area type of situation. Michael's pissed that I'm saying all of
Well, I
this.
mean,
but
basically, if we follow that rule, we don't get Superman. So.
well, that's true, but it's also, to me, it's not the right thing to do. I'm not saying that he shouldn't. He should help.
You're right. He broke rules and made adjustments.
He did, and
On
so
the
you
fly.
have to follow your moral compass, and it's sort of like the problem that I have when I'm watching Star Trek when they start getting all these. Well, we can't help these people, but I guess at this one time we'll help the people. It's like you should have a list of extenuating circumstances. Like nothing is that black and white. Like we're never going to interfere. We're just going to let them all die. Like that's not really realistic.
Yeah.
The end.
Did anyone else notice Margot's terrifying pose at the beginning of this movie?
Yes, the
Yeah. What? Can someone explain?
the smile in the camera.
Jimmy was doing the camera and he quickly turned it on Margot and then it showed it through the lens and she did one of these like.
Yeah, and it was
Quick.
really awful. You commented on it. You said that she looked anorexic.
Oh, well, she just generally looks anorexic, but I
It
think
also felt like a weird cut, almost like they did that during shooting as a joke. Like that
I
was
thought it
her
was
being her, and they said, you know what, we're going to put that in there as them just horsing around because it was actually kind of out of character for Lois
Right.
Lane a little bit too.
Right, yeah. It's hard to tell, because
I mean, this is theater. after all.
we know that they weren't doing a lot of improv on the set because of the technical complexity of the production, but in those character moments, I know that they were doing traditional filmmaking where they look at the script, they all discuss, they rehearse, they massage the story, they massage the lines. So it's possible. It's possible it was an improv or something created on the set.
Yeah. I need the answer. No, that just made me laugh. It just felt kind of like a funny beat. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the guy selling fruit and vegetables going, fresh fruit and vegetables, get them while they're hot.
Hey, baby, you're looking really good. Hey, fresh fruit and vegetables. Did you catch that part?
Yeah, I did.
Like every time
Hey,
a woman
honey.
walked by, he's like, "Hey, sweetie. Oh, by the way, fresh fruits and vegetables. Hey, nice."
But then he
nice."
followed it with get them while they're hot. Like, did he steal them?
Or chestnuts, a
tomatoes.
fresh fruit or vegetable.
No, he had tomatoes and remember that guy stole an apple or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
And he was
Hot
like, hey, where
crackers.
you going? Hot crackers, Michael.
And the reason they established that guy being there in front of the Daily Planet is because originally in the beginning of the second film, which is not in the theatrical cut, Lois, if you recall at the end of the first film, she says, yeah, Clark's never around. And then she's like, wait a minute.
So silly.
And then she's like, no, that's ridiculous, But in the second movie, they're having a meeting in Perry White's office, and Lois has the paper, and the paper has Superman on it, and she's looking at Clark because she's still suspicious, and she looks at the paper, and she looks at Clark, and she looks at the paper, she's just drawing glasses and a hat on it. And then she realizes, oh my gosh, Superman is Clark Kent. And so Perry White leaves the office, and Clark's following him, and she's like, stop for a minute. And then she's like, I know who you are. And then he's like, no, that's ridiculous. And she's like, I'm so confident I can prove it. And she's like, you won't let me die. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he turns around and she pulls up the blinds and she decides she's going to jump out the window of the building. And he's like, what? And she's like, you won't let me die, Superman. And she just jumps out the window. And
She wasn't acting in that moment. That was just Margot Kidder.
I think that was probably just, them messing around on the set and they decided to keep it.
So he runs.
Sorry, Margo.
The way he gets around it is he runs so fast that nobody in the building notices that he went by them. And then he gets to the bottom and he uses his breath to slow her fall. And then she bounces off an awning into that fruit cart.
Hang on, let me save you.
And then he runs back up and he's looking down from the window and she's in the fruit cart. And she's like, Clark. And he's like, what have you done? And that sorts, she's like, oh, you didn't save me. I can't believe I thought you were Superman. Which they then kind of do in Superman 2, the theatrical, where she jumps into the river at Niagara Falls. But, you can argue which one's the better scene.
Oh, I like them both.
Why choose when you don't have to?
Right.
Well,
So any closing thoughts, anybody?
My closing thoughts are that it's a shame that we never got to see Donner's original vision for 1 and 2 together, especially given that he wanted to continue to make these movies, much like he did with Lethal Weapon. He wanted to do a 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6. He just wanted to keep the saga of Superman going.
they could have had a 4-hour or a 4-day event.
Yeah, it would have been amazing. And it's too bad because Christopher Reeve was the best Superman we've ever had on screen by a wide margin.
Sure.
And we're never going to get to see that, but it's life. So.
I think the only other note I didn't mention is this is again about Krypton. Did Tron blow up all over this place?
Tron?
Yeah.
I think it did.
I feel like, remember back
The
when you were
3M
in
glass clothing they were wearing.
do you remember in third grade when you would like put a washer into like sugar water and it would grow like crystals on there?
Indeed, I do.
Well, that's what the whole world looks like. It looks like rock crystals that you grew in the third grade. Their entire planet.
It's sweet.
It's brilliant.
It's like
lighting
a
to
lollipop.
Get those suits to light up. It's brilliant. I think it's the same material they wrapped the lightsaber blades with in the Star Wars movies on set to make them
makes sense.
glow.
And they used it for the screens as well.
Yep.
So.
Yep. So
I think they worked a little too hard on that. I don't think they got the bang for their buck. But I do agree with the sentiment that they should pop.
right.
It's just when that guy was wearing the dome helmet and he's like, investigate. I was just kind of going, all right, I'm not. Probably
I feel
should.
like I'm watching Doctor Who.
I feel like they should have gone with a bagel.
And we never get to follow up with that guy because Krypton blows up. But if you watch the 3-hour cut, you see that guy headed to Jor-El's lab, and he gets crushed by falling debris. So
you get to see the entire saga of that guy.
right, which
in the
is
3-hour
so
cut.
important.
It is an epic.
Right.
They established the hell out of that guy.
Prepare
Right.
yourself for a
Right.
tale.
Of Rock Salt City. See, Rock Salt City.
But that's I guess that's my final thought on it is that they've never
The
managed
tragedy of Domehead.
to make they've never managed to make a perfect Superman movie. They've never
No.
Done it.
He
And
noticed there was too much power being used. Only one man can stop Jor-El.
I think there's too much power being used, boss. Well, why don't you go investigate?
I feel like we've transitioned into a radio drama.
This summer, if you only see 1.5 movie,
Hey, does
Domehead.
anybody want to?
Domehead Part 1, The Domining.
Sorry.
Anybody want to do a How Did We Survive?
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I think so too. So I got this one pulled up, and I'm just going to go through it. Our person tonight is going to be
Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney. Yeah, that sounds good. In the 7th grade, I would take the bus and walk home with a bunch of friends. The group would sometimes separate while one group would walk ahead of the other. Out of nowhere, a rock would fly right past you from the group, either behind or in front of you.
That sounds like a challenge.
Another rock would be thrown back, and before you knew it, both groups would be in an all-out rock war. Rock war.
And so the bus
It
just
sounds
sort of
very metal.
takes off. She's
The
like,
bus
I'm out
is
of
like-
here.
Oh my God!
I learned my lesson last week.
Rocks flying back and forth. If it ever came hand to hand, we would pick up whatever was around and hit each other with it. This just sounds like street thugs. I don't know what
Got to keep your head on a swivel. Rick, you killed a man with a hand grenade.
I killed a man in Reno just to watch him die with a rock.
Where did I get a hand grenade? I think you better lie low.
Sometimes it was sticks of wood. Sometimes it was a random item like a water hose. LOL.
A water hose?
is
So,
this
yeah,
is a
just-
stick ever made of anything other than wood?
Oh, yeah.
You got your
Dynamite?
your plastic sticks.
Oh, fair.
Stick of gum.
Yeah.
Right.
Just like a rain of dentine.
Okay. Da, da, da. We did this every single day. And you'd think they would start to like see it coming and come prepared with like
I
water
think
pistols. or
As
something.
neighborhood kids did, just slowly diminished as they were going to the hospital for various injuries.
We wouldn't stop until either someone got hurt or someone came out of their house yelling at us. I assume that was, "You kids, get off my lawn.
Quit throwing my lawn at people.
Stop throwing around my water hose."
That one boggles my mind.
I mean,
throwing a whole water hose.
I'm wondering, are they like picking up the water hose and like hitting people with it like a whip? Or are they just like throwing the whole hose?
That is wicked.
Hardcore, right?
That's like something people do to other people to be mean.
Paul McCartney is a badass. We even got the cops called on us several times. Well, I imagine so if you're stealing people's water hoses and throwing rocks.
That tears it, just the water hose.
We would run because WTF are they going to do? Chase 30 kids through the neighborhood? LOL.
The Elliott strategy.
We knew every turn and every alley. Surprisingly, we never got too injured from our rock wars. Rock Wars. There's something about that just is so catchy. Rock Wars. It kind of reminds me of Rock Lords.
Yeah, Battle of the Rock Lords.
Yeah.
That's the name of this story.
That
Battle
is.
of the Rock Lords.
It is. Some heads got hit hard. Sometimes someone would cry from it. And sometimes a real fight would break out from the chaos. But that's about it. I think that's enough, don't you? I mean...
No, that's great. I mean, these kids grew up strong, grew up tough.
They grew up strong and they grew up right.
Yeah.
Them Indiana boys on an Indiana night. No, I think I missed something. It's a Tom Petty line. Never mind.
Yeah, they grew up like miscreant anarchists is what they grew up as.
Good.
The next week, we started setting fires.
We burned all the garden hoses in town that week.
Where's this letter from?
We're not saying.
It's from Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
The names were changed to protect the guilty.
Brighton.
Liverpool.
It doesn't sound like Brighton. It sounds like Palestine, but whatever.
It does. It really does.
Yeah, worldly kids.
So we're always looking for these wonderful stories from you guys. And so if you have any stories of how you survived your childhood, or also we're adding a new piece. I think it'd be fun to add another level to the Dreamland write-in section. So how about if you have any questions that are like geek problems, we're going to call it Geek Probs. If you've got geek problems that need geek answers, you can write those into us at thedreamlandpodcast@gmail.com. Or if you have a How Did We Survive, you can also write that in. And Aaron and I will answer it. Maybe our special guest, whoever that might be that week, will also
We'll
help.
ask.
Yeah, we'll
Put
get
them on the
those
spot.
answers for you.
Hard-hitting interviews. That's what you come here for.
I mean, put our knowledge to the test. See if we can give you the correct answer that's going to solve all your problems.
Just set those expectations.
I'm
right
setting
where
them
they-
really, really high.
Okay.
It's going to be amazing.
Challenge accepted.
Okay. So send those in to us at thedreamlandpodcast@gmail.com. And you can check out RetroBlasting and everything else we're doing just by going to our YouTube channel, going to our Facebook page, and be sure to subscribe and tell your friends about the podcast. And I guess we will see you guys on the next one.
Sounds good. See you
Sounds
guys
good.
soon.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.